thank you for joining me. Welcome to another edition of Boss Builds. I'm Scott Hards, and this is my Jagdtiger. If you've been following along, you saw that we finished the camouflage painting in our last episode, and since the end of that, I've also finished up all of the detail painting. The periscopes, the exhaust pipes, the toolbox, everything on the back here. Everything has been completely painted. So that means we're up to the markings and the weathering. And today, we're going to be showing you two really fundamental, really basic, really essential techniques that if you haven't learned them yet, for example, if you're still just building snap fit kits and haven't really started doing scale modeling yet, you're absolutely going to need to add these to your repertoire of skills to do a good job. And the first of those is the markings, as I mentioned, and that means decals, or decals, or water slide marks, depending on what you call them in your neck of the woods. We'll be applying the decals to the Jagdtiger here in just a few minutes. And the other thing we're going to be showing off today is how to do a basic wash. And that's going to be the first step in the weathering process to make this Jagdtiger, which looks like it just rolled out of the factory here, look like something that's actually seen a battlefield and a little bit of dirt and dust. And that's a lot of fun. I really like that part of the process, and I think you'll enjoy it too as we get into it. So if you've got some experience in scale modeling, you may not learn all that much in today's episode, but again, if you're coming over from snap fit kits or trying to get into scale modeling for the first time, there's some very important stuff in today's episode, and I hope you'll join in. Let's get started. Okay, we're now ready to get started on the decals. Now, if you've done gunpla kits or other kits that have like stickers before, some of the stickers that come with kits like that these days are very high tech and look pretty good after you've applied them. But you still can't beat decals. Decals thickness is measured in microns, and if you apply them properly, it's going to look like they were painted directly onto the model. And that's why people, are willing to put up with the little bit of extra work that's required to put a water slide decal onto a model. But I think you'll see today that it's really an easy process. Now, in order to get that to go smoothly, there's a few things you're going to want to have on hand before you get started. And that's, of course, the decals that you're going to be putting on, a small dish of water, preferably somewhat lukewarm, some Q-tips or cotton swabs, some tissues, also good for wiping up a little bit of extra water that will happen now and then, a good hobby knife, or possibly a nice precision pair of scissors. I prefer working with a hobby knife for this stuff. And perhaps most importantly, a good pair of tweezers. This is a really nice precision pair of tweezers that I've been using for a long time. And by precision, they're not just they have a very nice fine point that comes together right at the tip, but also they're rather pointy. You can kind of hurt yourself with them if you're not careful. And that's really essential because you use them not just to handle and place the decals in place, but also you can use the tips of the tweezers after they're in place to reposition them. And they tend to not hit the mark on the first time, and it's almost always essential to be able to have something handy to move them around, and the tweezers will come in perfect for that. Now, one thing that you also may need, depending on the kit you're building, but which we won't be using today, is Decal Softener. Now, this is the Japanese brand from GSI called Mr. Mark Softer, and what this does, just like the name implies, is make the decals slightly softer. So if you're going to be applying decals on a surface that's curvy or particularly rough, it's usually helpful to have something like this around. After it's in place, you put a couple drops of that on it, or you may put a couple drops on the model before you put the decal in place, and it helps the decal to even get softer and form fit to the exact surface of the model. But again, where we're going to be putting decals on the Jagdtiger today is pretty much just flat spots, so we're not really going to be able to have to use that. So let's get started. Now, before you dive into the actual work, take a minute to familiarize yourself with where the various decals are going to go. And of course, the kit that you're working with will have callouts on the instructions showing like the number of the decal and where it goes on the model. Sometimes these can be a little bit vague, but just eyeball. For example, I'm looking here to see that the German cross is going to go exactly between where the two extra track links are going to go and a little bit higher than that, because there's not going to be anything on the kit itself that will show you exactly where to put it. So you have to depend on these callouts, but go ahead and familiarize yourself with where the various markings are going to go and what the markings are so that you don't make a mistake and put something in the wrong position. So we're going to go ahead and mark our tank as we have been, just like this early production version that they've been showing here in the instructions. So we're going to have the German crosses and the tank number 323 on the sides of the tank, And then on the back of the combat compartment, we also have 2 German crosses there. And then on the bow of the tank, we've got some kind of a serial number or other number that goes there. So that's about it for this particular tank. Tanks generally don't have a lot of decals, especially compared to aircraft or racing cars, which can be crazy. But we'll go ahead and dive in here. So step 1, of course, is identify which mark you're going to do. And we'll start with this German cross here on the side. And you just cut it out. So we make sure that we've got the right one, because very often on the decal sheets things can look similar even though they're slightly different in size. So the call out is for number 6, which is one of these 3 here. So we'll just go ahead and cut one of these out with the hobby knife here. Okay, again, you can use a pair of scissors to do this, but I prefer using a hobby knife myself. And you're going to want to leave the decal in the water for 15 to 30 seconds. It just depends on the decals. And there'll have to be a little bit of trial and error before you become familiar with how many seconds the particular decal sheet you're working with requires. But you can test it to see how it's doing by pulling it out and trying to move it. And as you can see, wow, we're already moving here. So we're ready to go. Okay, so now that we've got the decal ready to go, we bring the backing paper close to where we want to put it, and then we just gently slide it off of the backing paper onto where we want it on the model. Now you don't need to worry about getting it in exactly the right position for starters, because as you'll see, we'll be able to move it around for a bit. Once you're happy with the position of the decal, then what I like to do is use a cotton swab, Q-tip, whatever you call them, and I gently roll it over the surface of the decal. This will suck up all of the excess water that is underneath the decal and gently push it into place. So that is our first decal in position and ready to go. And now it's just a question of repeating this process for all of the other decals that we've got to put on the model. And again, the decals that I'm working with on this Takom kit come loose very, very quickly, so you don't really need to wait very long. Some kits' decals take much, much longer to come off. Just depends on where they were printed. Now, one thing, of course, you want to be careful of is, since we just put that German cross on above this one, it's not set yet or completely dry yet, and we don't want to knock it out of position while we're putting this one into position. So just be careful when you're working around decals that are already on the model. It's actually, in a way, easier than working with stickers, because stickers, basically, you get one shot, and if you miss it, that's it. But with decals, you can continue to reposition them if you mess it up. Now that the decals are done, the next big step we want to move to is the wash. But before we move to the wash, there is one important intermediate step that we need to take care of. And that is that we're going to spray a Gloss Topcoat on the entire tank now. And this is going to make our tank very, very shiny, and it'll look strange. And you may be wondering why we're going to do that, but it's to protect the decals that we've just put down. And it's also going to protect these acrylic colors that we've painted the tank with, because in the weathering process, we're going to use enamels, and the thinner in these enamels might dissolve the base color paint if we don't protect it with a top coat first. So I'm going to be using Mr. Super Clear, which is a product that's widely available here in Japan, but there's similar products available in other markets that you can use. Of course, MIG has the spray varnishes and stuff. There's a number of products that are available, but we're going to go with a spray can because I find this to be just quickest and easiest to do. So, as any spray product needs, you have to, of course, shake. And when you spray the model, you want to stay well back. I'm going to say no less than 20 to 30 centimeters or so away from your model, and spray in very quick strokes, because you don't want, and this is just like with airbrushes, but you don't want to get too much of the surfacer or the top coat in any one area, because it will look terrible if you do. So we're going to stay well back from the model and do very quick, light strokes like this. You can't really see my hands moving, I'm afraid, but I'm moving very rapidly from side to side as I spray the tank with this clear coat. Quick run on the tank here. I'm going to let that dry for a couple of minutes and then see how it looks. As I pointed out, we're using the clear or glossy top coat right now in order to make the washing process easier. And that'll make the tank look weird and shiny. But again, as one of our final steps, we're going to use the flat stuff on the tank, so it'll get back to a more natural appearance, of course. So don't worry about making it shiny at this point. Now I've taken a look and it looks pretty good, but I'm going to add just another quick coat here to make sure that we've got those decals and the base acrylic coats protected. I think that should do it for now. Now we're going to let this dry for at least 1 hour. Now you can see we have a relatively shiny Jagdtiger here ready for the wash. And this is really one of my favorite parts of modeling, is doing washes, because they really start to make things look so real. Plus they're so easy and stress-free. In order to do a wash, you're going to want to have some enamel paint. And the brand doesn't really matter. Of course, Tamiya is a good choice. Today I'm going to be trying out the MIG product that we have here ready to go. Of course, Humbrol would be another option. Any good enamel paint is fine. And what you're going to want to do is the same thing in each case. You take the enamel paint and you thin it way out until it's almost a water-like consistency. So if I was going to use the Tamiya enamels, I would take the dark brown here and thin that out probably 3 or 4 parts thinner to 1 part of paint. So you get almost basically like brown water. You don't want to get it too thin because then the color won't show up very well in the tank. But you're going to want to thin it out very nicely. And then with the MIG product here, one of its selling points is that it's already thinned, so we don't need to thin it out. But you're still going to need the thinner in order for removing the excess after we're done with the washing process. So what do? Well, you take some of this wash and you put it on the tank. Now, let's talk about the color for a moment before we get started. On this particular color scheme, some people for washes might just dive in with a black. And black can look a little bit too harsh and show up a little bit too strong in areas. So I think we're going to go with a brown for this particular color scheme. We're in kind of an oily dark brown in the prepared product from MIG here. And it will fill in all of the little recesses. We're going to be using a very fine brush. This is a 3-0 brush, so it's pretty small. And we'll be using this fine brush to just tap the wash into recessed areas and on panel lines and things like that in order to let capillary action take the paint and flow it around the model and fill in areas that would be dirtier or darker on the actual tank, which would make things look much more realistic. Now, if you've used, for example, if you've ever built a Gundam kit and you've used like a Gundam marker to do panel lines, the basic concept is very similar, except we're going to be using a liquid paint and a brush instead. And instead of using an eraser or something else to take off excess, we'll be using the thinner again on the brush to blend in and remove the excess. So let's get started here. Now, since this wash is pre-thinned, it might be tempting to just, when you're doing the work, take the brush and go right from the bottle. But we're not going to do that, because if I were to spill it or something while I'm doing the work, that would be a catastrophe. So we're going to take some of the wash and just pour it into my handy-dandy paint tray here. And again, this is such easy work that you don't need to get too worried about getting any excess or putting too much on the model, because you can always take it back off. So we're going to just dip the paint, or dip the brush into the paint, or the wash as it is now, which is a thinned enamel. And then we're just going to touch it to the model in the areas where there's panel lines or recessed areas where we want the paint to go. So we'll try maybe the top of the fender here, and just touching the brush. And it might be hard to see on video, but the wash tends to run nicely down along areas like this hinge here. That's a little bit too much, but again, we can take it off. We've got some weld marks here. That'll be a great place for a bit of wash. Got a little, I don't know what these little dots are, but there's these little dots along the surface here. Great place for dirt to collect, so we're going to put some wash in there. And this is going to look really, kind of almost cartoony or amateurish at this point. But as I keep saying, we're going to be able to take this off and blend it in later, so it'll be easy to get it to be exactly what we want. So I'm just going to keep doing this, taking this wash and putting it on parts of the tank. Anything that basically looks interesting. Now, for the purposes of showing off the effects really well, one of the best places, and where you can go a little bit on the heavy side, would be like on the road wheels here, because the road wheels will get really dirty on a tank, and they'll also show off this wash rather nicely. So you get the individual nuts and stuff showing off there. Some folks call these kinds of washes pin washes, like I think pin is for pinpoint. I've just always called them a wash. These days there's another technique called filtering in some sectors, which is basically taking a wash that's thinned even a bit more and applying it to pretty much the entire surface of the model in order to bring colors all into the same kind of a tone. And we may in fact be trying that later. In the meantime, let's just keep working on the tank here. The area around the engine deck, of course, on a German tank or many countries' tanks is a great place to do lots of crazy weathering. I'm not going to go too overboard on this project, but you can see some examples by experts on the internet where they've done some amazing work with oil and grease and other glop all over the engine area to really goop it up. Alrighty, I think we got most of it, so go ahead and let this dry, and then we'll take a look at what we've done, and if we're not happy we can always add more or take it off. That's what makes washes so much fun. The enamel paints that we put on in that thin form have now dried, so we're going to go ahead and now start, taking them off or blending them into an appearance that we're happy with. So all we need here, of course, is the thinner. So I'm going to take the MIG thinner here, and as usual, put a little bit in my tray, so I don't want to work directly from the bottle. And now we're just going to start, in effect, painting with the thinner in order to remove the enamel. So let's start with the base of the gun barrel here, where I've really slopped on quite a bit too much of the wash. And if you just paint with the thinner, you can see how you can blend it in and make it look less pronounced and get more of the feel that you want. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is let this dry once, because with the thinner still wet on the tank here, plus the gloss coat that we applied, things are looking pretty shiny. So to get an idea of what it's going to look like, we're going to let it dry for a while and then adjust again as necessary. But I think you should have the basics of how a wash works. And of course, it's an area where you can just be free to be creative like you want to, putting on as much or as little as you want. And of course, this is a technique that's great not just on tanks, but aircraft, cars, Gundams, you name it. Anything that you want to make look like it's actually been used and been out there. This is a fantastic and very simple technique for weathering things up. Coming along rather nicely, if I do say so myself. Now again, it's still a little bit shiny because the thinner hasn't completely dried. So what I'm going to do is, after I let this thinner completely dry, then I'll take a look at the tank again and see if I'm happy with the way the wash has come out and make any adjustments if I'm not. And then once I'm happy with the wash, I'm going to take my flat spray here and do another sealing coat over the entire vehicle to give it a nice flat finish. But we're still not done. After that, we're going to move into another step in the weathering process, another one that I like to do quite a bit, and that's dry brushing. Plus, we're also going to try a little bit of fun with some pigments, which is actually going to be kind of new for me. So hopefully that will go smoothly. So we're going to try some pigments and some dry brushing, and I'll show you the steps on how to do that and get it one step closer to completion next week on the next episode of Boss Builds. Thanks for watching.